This is the Roots and All podcast, and I'm your host, Sarah Wilson. Join me as I talk about all aspects of gardening with some of the top horticulturists from around the world. This week, I'm joined by Martha Krempel and Tina Worboys, whose Chelsea gardens were created to champion important causes, peatland restoration and dementia research. We discuss whether show gardens need to justify their environmental cost through the awareness and change they can inspire, and explore the power of gardens with a purpose. Tell me what you've been up to with this show garden.
So what I've been up to is I designed two gardens, so one for Chelsea Flower Show and one for St Pancras. And so I was got in touch with by the Malvern Garden Building people who sponsor the houseplant studio area, because they know I've got an indoor garden at home, and then I marry that garden up with the garden outside. And so they wanted me to be part of that. So I agreed, but I agreed on the premise that we could then do a much bigger garden outside. And the RHS were very up for that this year. They wanted those houseplant studios to sit in an environment that was also a garden outside. So that was great for me. And then I was given the opportunity to do it. And I thought, well, I'd really like there to be some kind of reason behind doing a show garden, not just for my own sake. So I located my cabin in a peatland area of West Cornwall, where you have in very close proximity a kind of lush valley planting as well. But it gave me the opportunity to really to talk about the peatland restoration work that's going on all over the country and how significant that is. And not just the message of please don't use peat in your compost, but actually please understand these really fantastic but misunderstood environments and understand what work needs to be done in order to restore them. And so it's about funding so that the bogs can be re-wetted. And that's really what I wanted to talk about. So I joined forces with the Southwest Peatland Partnership, and they came down and talked to the public, but also supplied a peat core. And the peat core at Chelsea was slightly smaller than the one that they were able to achieve for St Pancras. So the one at Chelsea was only a peat core that was 500 years of peat. And then when they extract the peat, it's taken out and it goes back to where it came from. So they have permission from Natural England and Triple SI sites to do this and then restore it. So the RHS, they didn't want us to bring actual bog to Chelsea because that would contravened their idea of peatland preservation, even though the Southwest Peatland Partnership have been doing this bog in a box for a very long time, where they bring a section of the bog in a little box and they take it around to schools to teach children about this is the peatland, this is what it looks like, this is this very misunderstood environment, and when you come across this, tread carefully or please understand it. So at St Pancras we've successfully done that. We have 4 sections of peat bog and the public are really loving it. And the other thing that the Southwest Peatland Partnership have done is they've got this artist called Rose Ferraby, who is an archaeologist as well and another lover of the bog. And she created a soundscape where she sunk a mic down into the bog, overlaid it with the specific sound of particular birds who frequent the bog, bogland, peatland, moorland areas, and a musical soundtrack to the back of it. And it's a very beautiful sensory piece. So people can come into the cabin at St Pancras, put the headphones on, be touching the bog and listening to this beautiful soundscape. So it's a sort of multi-sensory experience we've created at St Pancras, along with, of course, the piano. So that was the sort of impetus behind the whole project, really, was what it feels like to compose, to play, to be creative in an environment surrounded by plants. And so I married up those 3 ideas of the power of music and horticulture and also peatland preservation. A lot in a bundle, obviously, I'll grant you. But it worked.
It is a lot, yeah. So it's an impressive achievement. Well, so when you say touch the bog, how could people actually do that?
So the sections of bog that have come to St Pancras Station are actual sections of bog.
And how big are they?
Each box is 60 centimetres by 60 centimetres, and there are 4 side by side. So you get a multitude of tiny little plants in there. So there's cotton grass, there's sundews, there's sphagnum moss. And some are in stages of just about to burst into life because the peat has continued growing in the station, which is also quite a phenomenal thing. I mean, when we did the garden, I was uncertain as to how the plants would survive in the station, given, it's an unnatural situation. But two things in its favour. Number one, the St Pancras Station has the most incredible arched, domed glass structure. So that is natural light, albeit several metres away. But it also is cold in there. So stations are cold by their very nature. It's drafty. So that has preserved the plants we've got in there very well. In St Pancras, the cabin has no roof. So I needed to design a different structure for that installation. And so the planting essentially is around the edge of the roof. So it's a drop down shelf, if you like, against the perimeter walls of the cabin. And on there is planting emblematic of just plain moorland. So heathers, ferns, leucanthera, oxeye daisy, and your digitalis, a few digitalis, not too many because they were mostly going over by the time we were installing at St Pancras, because it was June the 1st. We did that install. And so visually from the top, what you look down, what you see the piano centre, the indoor planting all around that. To one side, we have the bog in a box area. And then around the perimeter edging, you have the moorland planting. So it's all still flowering. It's definitely a construct and it's a version of events, if you like. But it works and it has a really good feeling inside. And all the pianists who've come and played, so it's really quite incredible how different it is playing the piano in the cabin to playing a piano just on the main concourse. There's something about stepping into the building with all the planting that has created a completely different environment. That's quite special.
And why St Pancras?
Well, St Pancras have sponsored peatland preservation in the past, and they have a programme themselves of sponsoring rewetting of the bog, not specifically in Cornwall, I don't think, but further up the country, so probably in the Peat District area, I think.
So once it has done its job at St Pancras, I presume the bog in the box will go back to where it came from. And then what happens to the rest of it if you've got any plans for it?
Most of the indoor planting is actually my own planting from home. And so that will come back to me and it's my planters. And then the ledge planting, I will take that back down to Cornwall, but also some of it will go onto my planted roof at home. Nothing goes to waste, as you know. Somebody wants it. Friends, I gave away a lot of plants. I've sold on some plants from Chelsea. Nothing has gone to waste because they were really beautiful things. And I think people were quite interested in having plants from Chelsea. And in the houseplant studio area, you can sell off your plants on the Saturday at Chelsea, which is quite an interesting experience.
Yes, I have experienced that. So one of my questions was around the kind of care of the plants while they were in situ. You've mentioned St Pancras. It was a very tricky couple of weeks, wasn't it? We had real cold, then real hot. And so how was the maintenance of it been?
So with regard to when we took everything down from Chelsea, the indoor plants all came back to my house and my house was kind of rammed with plants. And I've got a new dog, so it was quite interesting trying to keep him away from the plants because he quite likes eating things. But the other plants, my plan was to take them to my allotment, but we had that intense spell and there's no shade on my allotment. So very kindly, my sister Claire said I could put them in the shady parts of her garden. And her garden's quite a long London garden that goes down to the railway tracks. So I was really fortunate. And then the week between Chelsea finishing and the install at St Pancras, I spent every day watering, which was quite something. One day I was just there for 5 hours. I started at one end, worked my way through it, and then had to go back again because my car recorded it as 37 degrees. It was unreal, that kind of heat. And then I had to keep moving the plants around. And then there were certain plants that I knew were not going to St Pancras. So I encouraged friends to come and buy them. And that's happened. That's been happening. Again, I'm doing some more plant selling today. So they're all going to good homes, Sarah.
Excellent. And how do you think the garden has worked? I know it's early days and a lot of these things are intangible, but how do you think it's worked in terms of raising the profile of the peatlands and, like you say, maybe achieving funding?
I think what was brilliant at Chelsea was the peatland preservation people were there most days, at least one or two of them, and they talked a lot to the public. And some very interesting conversations came out of that. And then Johnny, one of the ecologists, he's been invited to come and do further talks. In terms of the public, just generally speaking, does it encourage people to think again rather than buying peat-heavy compost? I would like to think so. But as you say, these things are a slow drip feed and they're not measurable or calculable. but I certainly feel as though it was an opportunity to talk about it. These are misunderstood environments for many years, and people are getting to understand them now because there's a lot of talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, just how undervalued are they, do you think?
I think it's not so much the undervalued, it's the fact that, flood mitigation is a really pressing concern because our weather has changed even in the last 10 years. And I think if you can re-wet a peatland and remove land drains, then you've got this natural flow of where the water is supposed to be going. So any community that is downwind of a peatland area, I'm sure they'll be delighted to know that the water is going to stay in the bog where it was intended to stay. I think in very simple terms, it's an undoing of manned intervention, isn't it? And I think that's what Southwest Peatland Partnership are talking about. And it's hard to get that message across, Sarah, in a garden setting because people are there to see flowers, but they are also there to understand a little bit more about our landscape. And hopefully in talking about it and talking about how beautiful these landscapes are, how extraordinary it feels to be walking on a heathland and come across this kind of aqueous and uncertain surface and think, oh, what's that? Why is it firm here and not firm here, the ground that I'm treading on? And then it forces you to look down, see the different vegetation that's there. As a kid growing up, my dad used to, when we walked on any moorland, so whether it was in Yorkshire or Ireland, Dad would explain that you can tell where the peat is, where the water is, because the vegetation changes, the grass is coarser, and you can see it because it's a different colour, it's a different shade of green. And so when this opportunity came up, I kind of remembered all that stuff that I'd been told as a young person walking on moorland. And now, obviously, we're talking about moorland and peat bogs in a different way, hopefully inspiring people to be part of the process of restoring the peatlands.
Yeah, I know you are a very eco-conscious designer, and I was speaking to somebody the other day who said, I've kind of thought about doing Chelsea and I just can't square it away. I can't do it because of, the environmental kind of costs involved. And I think that they are a big loss to the show. And I think there's a whole raft of designers who actually could be part of the Chelsea or the RHS canon who aren't because they've chosen not to do it. But I think there's a balance between the cost of it and trying to mitigate that, but also the awareness that brings. Do you feel like all Chelsea gardens really need to kind of justify their existence at this point in the game?
Absolutely. I mean, that is the only reason I would do it if I had something else to say rather than it just being a glory piece for myself. I just don't feel I'm a designer who needs to do that. But I felt like this was an opportunity to talk about an ecosystem that I'm interested in, and also had quite a lot of the internal plants myself, most of them, in fact. And as I say, none of the plants have gone to waste. And also, my budget was quite small, very small. And yeah, there's a footprint, isn't there, to all builds and specifically show gardens. And it is a crazy experience doing one. I tried to keep my costs down because I had to. But I think if you've got an opportunity to maybe say something that changes somebody's approach in a way for the better, so in an ecological way, encouraging people to get on board with preserving peatlands, then that's a reason to do it.
Thanks, Martha. Next up is my chat with Tina. Well, can you start by telling me about your garden that you did recently?
Yes, so it was in the container garden category at Chelsea, and it was called the Alzheimer's Society Microbes and Minds Garden. And it was a small garden, which it went on a bit of a journey, really. So I designed it inspired by where I live. I fairly recently moved out from West London and live in Worcestershire, which is surrounded by apple trees. And I wanted to bring a bit of that sort of apple magic back to West London because, they're kind of crazy about apples around here. It's all apple trees, it's all orchards, it's all cider makers. And I found the whole thing really inspiring, actually. So I wanted to bring some of that sort of style and look to a garden. But also in parallel with that, I was really interested in gut health. And that's something that's really interested me since moving here. And I've been researching a lot on it. So I started looking at apple cider vinegar. And that's what brought the garden to life, really. So I started exploring apple cider vinegar and its effects on the gut and the gut microbiome and how that affects your health. So it was a whole story in there that I wanted to talk about. So at the heart of the garden, I had this beautiful apple tree, which represented the mother, which is the culture of bacteria that grows in the apple cider vinegar when you ferment the apples in water. And it's the real powerhouse of the apple cider vinegar, really. It's where all those amazing enzymes and bacteria are in. And it's this sort of weird, gloopy mixture, but it's very powerful. So I loved this idea of the mother being in there. So our apple tree stood proudly in the middle and represented the mother. And then as I was researching about apple cider vinegar and the mother, you're supposed to protect the mother in amber glass because the light will actually degrade the mother and sort of ruin what you've created there. So yeah, you can put it in the cupboard or you can put it in amber glass. And I loved this idea of protection and the amber glass. So these sort of images and shapes came to mind of these big curved shapes coming around the central apple tree, protecting the mother. And then what I had was a bench on the other side. So we had one side of this big curved shape coming round, protecting the mother. And then on the other side, it continued round this bench, this idea that it was them protecting you, a kind of metaphor for the wellness benefits of taking something like the apple cider vinegar. So it created this real cocooning little protective space in the middle there, a sort of calm center. And I had a water feature in there, bubbling water feature, which represented the fermentation, but also created a lovely sound and added to the calming feel of the space. And then outside of this structure, it's part of the structure, but outside this cocooning space, the planting rippled outwards, which was this idea again of doing something like taking apple cider vinegar and protecting your gut health has this ripple effect through your body, and it's far-reaching, really. It seems to be something that touches all parts of your body, and that's where Alzheimer's Society came in. When I was looking for a partner to take the garden forward, I'd already designed it and I had my place at Chelsea, but I needed that partner and that funding and that sponsorship to really bring it to life. And it was a serendipitous moment, really, because my husband, who makes documentaries, was working on a film with the Alzheimer's Society about Jon Snow. It premieres this week, actually. And he knew about the gut-brain connection. You know, obviously we'd talked about the concept. And he suggested, why don't we speak to Alzheimer's Society? And so they, fired off an email. And as luck would have it, they had wanted to do a Chelsea garden for some time. And they'd also, really serendipitously, had just come back from a big conference in Canada where they'd been looking at exactly this gut-brain connection and how the gut is affecting changes in the brain. So it was quite a timely email for them. So it was great. So they were on board and, they were very happy with the design because for them, it was kind of a conversation starter about doing these things for your gut that could potentially help your brain. And, they've been looking into this and there's a lot of research done recently suggesting there are these links and there's far more that needs to be done, but it's a sort of new, rich area of investigation for them. So, it sort of rounded off everything really beautifully for me. So coming from this idea of starting with apple trees and looking at gut health and how gut health has this effect and these, simple changes or things we can take that can affect our gut. And then talking to Alzheimer's Society, who are really looking into this and this potential that it can have on brain health, just, made a really interesting story for me.
I love that. I think when you have an idea and it's meant to come to life, the things just fall into place, in a kind of quite fateful way. I'm a big believer in that. And it does sound like the perfect journey, really, that everything just happened in the right way. I mean, this could be my take on it, and it could be my kind of, I'm bringing my own preconceived ideas to the table, but I'm slightly surprised that the Alzheimer's Society went for a garden that was looking at a natural remedy, because, I mean, I know they obviously do this in tandem, but I would assume they maybe go more down the route of pharmaceuticals. So it's actually quite refreshing, and I think, to me, slightly surprising that they went down the route and said, actually, there is this connection and it's something that we're looking into. Were you surprised by that?
Yes, I was actually. Yes, because initially I was looking at all different avenues and they hadn't come to mind, probably because of that reason, but talking to them, they very much are looking at these different things. In fact, they've recently put out statements that they've identified 14 modifiable risk factors for your life. So, different things that you can do sort of simple things really, from diet and exercise and, all those kind of things. They have, specific things that we can do or ways we can change our diet that will hopefully mitigate our risks of developing Alzheimer's in later life. So they're not saying do this and it won't happen, but there are certain factors that are modifiable that will sort of mitigate those risks. So, it's such a complex issue. I think they're doing research in all these different areas. And I think something like this, once they start seeing connections and positive results, it's something they just want to invest more in and find out more, because, it is the biggest killer in our country, which I found amazing, that in every 3 minutes someone develops dementia in the country. And that is such a big thing, and it's so underdiagnosed that I think all these avenues for them are worth exploring, especially when there's glimmers of connection and hope in there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't expect you to know the ins and outs of this, but as a concept, how does gut health affect brain health?
Yeah, it is a tricky one for me to explain, but I think it's down to inflammation, and it's down to those microbes in the gut. And, the gut-brain axis is this sort of direct link between the two. So, it's quite sort of heavy science of what's happening. But what I do know is there are these links, and there is more research to be done. And it's, it is something that they want to look at more. And yeah, the microbes in there, there's something happening, they believe, that is affecting those changes in the brain. But more research is needed in that.
It's nice to see that we are looking at a sort of broad spectrum when it comes to health. That gives me hope, I feel. So first off, with the apple trees, did you pick any in particular to include in the garden?
Well, I looked at lots. So I worked with the team at Frank P. Matthews here in Tenbury Wells, and I had a lovely time with them walking around the growing fields and looking at the different varieties and species. And they taught me through the way they're all pruned for different things. And initially I had thought that we'd need cider apples in there, but you can make apple cider vinegar with any apples. So that made it a much easier journey and actually a nicer story in the space. If you imagine this is a small space for somebody, having an eating apple is a lot easier to deal with, and you're going to have a lot more benefits than a cider apple. So yes, you can make your apple cider vinegar with it, or you can just pick them off and eat them. So it was really looking at what was a beautiful shape and beautiful colors. And because I was having these strong structures, which were inspired by the amber glass, they had this lovely sort of ombre through them, from a deep brown at the bottom to this golden amber at the top. The idea was they were replicating how the light plays through amber glass. So where it's more dense, you have that darker color. And then when the light comes through, it's lighter. So that was a very strong color story in the space. So I knew I needed blossom and trees that would harmonize and work with that. And although they wouldn't normally be in blossom, the team at Frank Matthews, Nick Dunn and the team worked really hard to get those trees in blossom for us. So that was incredible. And our main tree was tickled pink, which has this amazing cerise pink blossom on it. So again, when I saw that in the field and he talked me through it, that was definitely one that we were going to have. And something different for people, because we're used to seeing the pale pink into white blossom, but this very pink blossom was quite striking. So that was something lovely to bring to Chelsea. And they managed to do it, to bring the blossom there, which was great.
Yeah. And what else did you have in the garden aside from the apple trees?
So aside from the apple trees, the rest of the planting was inspired by the hedgerows and meadows and orchards of where I live, really. So that kind of slightly, much more naturalistic, looser look. One of the key plants I wanted in there, which to me just screams the May hedgerow, was cow parsley. So we had a lot of cow parsley in there, creating that froth in amongst wildflowers and cultivated flowers, really. Also familiar things. I wanted things in there that weren't necessarily a challenge for people, because the garden had quite a lot of juxtaposition in it, from the textures and materials to something very contemporary. I wanted to balance it with something more familiar and softer. So we had things like foxgloves in there and geraniums. So things that, as people are walking past, they can see and they can understand and they can think, well, I've got that in my garden. And it brings them in, which I really wanted. So we had a much softer look through the palette. I also had a few things in there that had dual purposes. So inside one of the planters, we had It was German chamomile, which is particularly good for digestion. We're more used to the Roman chamomile, which is very calming, but this one is great for digestion. So it was that idea of you could perhaps pick off some of the flowers and put them in your apple cider tonic to bring it back to the gut and back to the health. So there were a few herbs dotted through for that as well. And then the underplanting really was there for tree health. So we had things like the chives and nasturtiums to either attract or deter certain pollinators or aphids. And the rest of the garden really, again, was to attract the pollinators, because without them, we wouldn't have our blossom, which wouldn't have the apples. So, our story wouldn't go around. So yeah, that was the sort of story of the planting.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, it was a beautiful garden, definitely. And you said about bringing people in. How did the public receive it?
Do you know, it was kind of overwhelming, actually, because I went in thinking people would talk about, apple cider vinegar and, the structure and the shape and that kind of thing. But people were really emotional, actually. I had very emotional chats with people about this cocooning space that we'd created in the middle, these large sort of high gloss shapes that created this little nook in the center of the garden. It had a lot of people in tears. We had, quite a lot of tearful conversations. It was twofold, really. Some had family members dealing with Alzheimer's, and they could imagine their father or whoever it was in the space feeling safe. This idea of safety cropped up again and again. But likewise, I had people who had no connection to Alzheimer's or weren't caring for anybody become emotional, and the idea of themselves sitting in the space. It was mentioned several times. People kept calling it a warm hug. It was this idea of this really cocooning, safe, warm space that really drew people in and became quite emotional at the thought of being in there. So that was a surprise for me, really, although the garden had been designed around this idea of protection and also, this gut health story. And I wanted to layer in this idea that just being in a calm space, listening to the water bubbling in nature is calming and great for your gut and great for your health. I hadn't anticipated how strongly it would connect with people. And it's that really that stuck with me. It's that connection and that emotion, really, and that feeling of safety and security that we created in that space that has left me thinking, where else I could take this. And, the power of design shouldn't be overlooked. It really can connect with people and affect them in that way. So that was a very emotional time, actually.
I can imagine, as you say, people want to connect with you. They want to talk about their story. So, yeah. And as you said to me before, that you were there all week during the show. So, you would have had a lot of conversations that were probably quite emotional. But that is the power of a garden when you get it right, I think. And that's a lovely thing to do, particularly if you're doing it to flag a particular issue up or for a specific cause. Where is the garden now? Did it move on?
It did, yeah. It's been relocated. It went to Hallmark Luxury Care Homes, and actually they have quite a few care homes looking after people with dementia, but the garden has actually ended up in one of their homes, which isn't a care home. It's more, I think they call it independent living. So it's what we would have called a retirement home, or perhaps we would have called it an old people's home, but now, it's called independent living, and it's the most extraordinary place. And it was a beautiful place where people can live after 65. And it was just a lovely community of older people living together in a vibrant space. It was quite a wonderful place to go and see, actually. So the garden has been relocated to their garden there. And the whole space is all about community living, and apparently talking to the staff down there living in these kinds of establishments can extend life for up to 7 years. So this power of community in older age is, again, another avenue that this garden has taken me down of interest in things that I didn't really expect, that designing for, an older generation or people with extra needs is fascinating and hugely fulfilling, and an area I'd love to look more into. But yes, it's gone to this beautiful home where people are enjoying it in their garden.
At the moment, show gardens has a slight perception around them, if you are particularly interested in sustainability, that they are not the most sustainable way of exhibiting horticultural skills, or there is a cost to them, but there is also, I acknowledge, a benefit to them. How have you kind of squared that away?
Yeah, it is very hard. I think, everything we made and produced has gone to a home that has been loved, and it's all been moved on to another garden. Nothing's been sort of broken up and skipped or anything. So, it's been designed for somebody, and it has gone to this home. So everything has been reused. And it's such an incredible platform for people like the charity, for Alzheimer's Society, to get their message across on such a big stage, So being able to help them bring their message through, and a different message, has worked really well. But then the whole garden has gone somewhere else and it's being enjoyed and loved. So, I think I'm happy in that respect that it has this onward life.
Thanks for listening, and thanks to Martha and Tina. If today's episode has got you thinking about the role gardens can play, beyond simply looking beautiful, you might also enjoy episode 190, Show Gardens, where I explore why we have show gardens, what they achieve, and whether they still have a future, and episode 230, Sensory Gardens and Autism, which looks at how garden design can support people and communities in meaningful ways. You'll find links to both in the show notes, and as always, thank you for listening. Next up is Benny with his insect of the week.
Holopyga generosa. So my insect of the week this week is a jewel wasp, or a cuckoo wasp. Now, some people confuse it and actually think there's only one species of jewel wasp, but in the UK and Ireland, I believe there are between 30 and 40 species of jewel wasp or cuckoo wasp. And the family is Chrysididae, or chrysid wasps, some people would say in the scientific community. Various genera. And the one today is one that I've fortunately been able to identify recently with some quite decent photos and some expert opinion to double check it. It's only known to be in the UK and Ireland in the last few years, and it's been kind of spreading quite quickly. It's absolutely stunning, and I hope you've seen a jewel wasp before, or seen one in a picture at least, and if not, I will be posting it on Instagram. The etymology, Holopyga, the Greek genus, comes from the abdomen kind of being more of a whole final segment rather than divided as much as some of the wasps are. So it just basically translates as whole rump or posterior. The second word, the epithet, the descriptor, is generosa, and that comes from Latin, meaning noble or generous, and that kind of relates to the wasp's brilliant metallic appearance. And I hope you'll be able to see that. The habitat is kind of open and sandy habitats usually, or can be kind of bare soil in general. I've been seeing them in parks in London, in all sorts of places really. And they are around, this particular species are around between April and June. The flowers is quite cool, mostly umbels. So fennel, mignonette's not an umbel, but wild parsnip, poison hemlock and lovage, I've seen it on recently. So I've seen it in the foliage nestled in fennel and plants like that, as well as nectaring on the flower. So it's really cool. Lots of wild umbels closely associated with. And the reason why I wanted to feature it was because last week I featured a very mad sounding sultry wasp called the shieldbug stalker, Astata boops. And this species of jewel wasp will have a host because it's a kleptoparasite. And you might remember kleptoparasites from the nomada bees, which don't raise their young. They actually behave in a cuckoo fashion, and they lay their eggs into the nest or on another host species. And this one I'm featuring today is really mad because it lays an egg on a shield bug, which would be picked up by another sultry wasp as its own quarry for its young. So just to get this straight, the wasp I'm featuring today is a magnificent jewel wasp called Holopyga generosa. And what it does, it speculatively or very cleverly lays an egg on shield bugs that it thinks or knows will be picked up by another wasp, which is a shield bug stalker, who will then carry a shield bug back to its own nest burrow for its young to develop on. And the jewel wasp has done nothing but lay an egg on a shield bug. Its own egg will hatch out, use the prey source that's been provisioned by the host species, and will develop from that and not allow the host species young to develop. It's absolutely mad that this stuff is happening out there. Such beautiful looking wasps, and there's all this crazy evolutionary madness happening. I thought I'd share those two examples for you because I just find them fascinating, and I hope you do. If not, they're absolutely magnificent to look at anyway. You'll see on the pictures. And I really hope you've seen a jewel wasp, and if you have, you may have been able to get an idea if you've had some good photography of it. As always, please record on the iNaturalist and iRecord apps, and do tag me into any sightings.
You can download or listen to the podcast direct from the website rootsandall.co.uk. Please also check out my Patreon, where you can make a one-off donation or take out a monthly subscription to help support the podcast. Because if you enjoy the show, please help it continue. I also have a GoFundMe where you can make a one-off donation. Even a one-off donation of £1 helps, and I'll be really grateful for your support. So please go to Patreon or GoFundMe and search for Roots and All Podcast.